In this tutorial, we'll be looking at how to use Genetica to modify 3D clothing. iClone will be used for the 3D portions of this tutorial. We'll start off in iClone. The first thing we want to do is create a character and export the texture that we want to modify. So click Actor and select one of the characters. I'm going to choose Trinity here. And then select the part that you want to modify. You could click Hair, for example. And over here you see the hair texture. But for this tutorial, we'll modify her top. So I clicked Upper Body. And here we see the texture for that top. So I'll select the texture. And then click this button here to export it. Now switch to Genetica, where we'll modify the texture. Start a new document. And the first thing we want to do is bring the texture into Genetica. To do that, select the Generate section here, and drag in an imported image node into the empty slot. Select the texture that we just exported. That brings the texture into Genetica through this imported image node. Now we want to draw over the texture, so click Advanced. Drag the canvas node over the original node, and select Insert Below. And what this does is it pipes the imported image into a canvas node. The canvas node is the node that lets us draw, so now we can draw on top of the original texture. I'll click Edit here. First we want to fill our canvas with the original texture, so I'll click Shape. A rectangle is already selected there, so I'll just drag a rectangle over there. And it fills it with blue. Instead, we want to fill that square with the imported texture. So I'll click Style, Edit. I'll select this blue layer here, and instead of Fill Color, I'll do Fill Input Texture. And click OK. And now that square is filling our canvas with the original texture. Now I want to start drawing on top of it, so I'll create a new layer. I'm zooming with the mouse wheel there. And I'll start by drawing some shapes here. Basically what I'm showing you here is how you might create a texture just like this if you didn't have the original texture, instead you were drawing it yourself. So we've drawn a blue shape here, but how would we create an effect that's similar to the shiny material in the original texture? Again, click Style and Edit. Again, we'll select this Fill Color, and now we want to create a shiny material. So select Bevel and Reflect Environment. And you see here how now our shape has this bevelly effect, but we don't want this hard bevel, and so we want a soft bevel. So I'm just going to increase soft bevel there. And here for environment, instead of this gray environment, I'll select a nice soft, shiny, clothy type environment. Click OK. Here you can see it's starting to fill in there. I'm just going to do a few tweaks. And now we have this shiny look that really is starting to match the original texture. I'll click OK. And one of the aspects of layers in Genetica is if you keep drawing additional shape in the same layer, it will take on that material we just created. So I might want to create more material on the other side here. And it's automatically taken on that shiny material. Now if you look at these designs, they all have a thick border around them. And let's look at how we can edit the style to imitate that as well. I'll click Style, Edit here. And you can create as many layers as you want. Here we have a shiny layer. I'll click New. But I'll click Make Outline and decrease the outline thickness there. And so now we have our shiny material and an outline that's been put around it. Just tweak that a little bit more and also change the color. So I'll click OK. And the next thing we want to do is render the texture. Now, what size we want to render it at? If you click the imported image node, you see the original one has a size of 1024, so that's the size we want to use as well. After selecting the size, click this button to render the texture. And after a few moments, the texture will render. Now, one reason why I picked this is because it does show a possible pitfall. Genetica works natively with square images, but this texture in particular is rectangular. So if you want to export it as is, you'd click that button, but you actually will have to pass this through a photo app to crop it in order to get that rectangular size that iClone is expecting. So instead of exporting here, you can click Copy and then paste it into any standard photo app, and then use a crop tool to cut it down to the expected size. Back in iClone, we can check our modified texture. Double-click the original texture here, then click the modified version. And we can see how it looks with our modifications. Looks kind of crazy, actually. Looks like two green alien eyes staring at me. A couple more quick comments before we finish with this example back in Genetica. Let's open the Canvas tab again. Now remember how I said that as you keep drawing the same layer, they will all get the same style. Well, what if you want different shapes to have a different style? Create a new layer here. And now if you draw, it'll have a style of its own. And you could recreate a completely new style for this layer, or you can base it on a different layer. So I can click the original layer, Style, click Copy there, then click the new layer, then click Paste. And that layer has been pasted in, so I can start modifying that. Another comment I wanted to make is the original artist made the cloth look ripply. What if you want to do something similar in Genetica? Again, it's just as easy as modifying the style. Select the shiny layer here, and where it says Use Noise, click Yes. And this will make the style look wrinkly, but if you edit the noise, you can select a different kind of noise. In this case, this drips noise has this nice up and down pattern. Just close that. Gonna tweak the depth there a little bit. And now I'll increase the noise strength a little. Click OK. And as you can see, by making some simple modifications, I now have a style that looks more like folded cloth. Now there are so many different ways in which you can use Genetica to modify clothing and so many different effects you can apply, it's probably worth covering one more example. For the upper body, I'll just swap it out with another one here, the violet top. It looks more businessy. And now as we did before, I'm going to select diffuse there, then export it. And now let's take a look at how we can modify the texture in Genetica. The first few steps will be the same as the previous example. Click New to start a new document. From the Generate section, drag in an imported image node, and select the original texture. I'll do Canvas, insert below, And we'll fill our canvas with the original texture. This texture is a little more sophisticated. It includes textures for various items like buttons. So let's look at how we'd modify only the main part of the suit. Go start a new layer and use the draw tool here. And I'm just clicking around the outline of the suit here. If I want it to be curved, I can drag, or I can just click for straight lines. I'm zooming in with the mouse wheel, and I'm using the right mouse button to pan the view. And now instead of drawing a new design, I want to do something completely different. I want to show you how you can change the textural elements of the existing design. I'm going to go to the Nodes tab here. With the canvas selected, I'm going to increase inputs to 2, and this gives us a new empty slot where I can drag in a completely new texture. Back in the library, if you open up the Presets tab, you can see that Genetica just includes tons and tons and tons of preset textures, all of which are ready for you to use to modify clothing. I'm going to pick an example from the cloth category, but really you can put metal on it, you can put anything on it, and you'll get a lot of interesting effects. And I'll just pick this first one here. This alchemist garb has interesting stars pattern. I'm going to drag it in there. And so now I have 2 textures feeding into the canvas, which means I can use either of these textures within the canvas. Let me go back in the canvas node and show you how. So if the new layer is selected, I'm going to edit the style. I'm going to delete that style, so that will make the new layer transparent, and we'll get another look at what the base texture looks like. Now the first thing I might want to do is modify the colors of the base texture, so I'll click New. Instead of Fill Color, I want to make this layer be an Adjust Color layer. Now I can do things like increase the contrast, for example, and that really darkened the bottom layer. Now I want to create another layer, and I'll do Fill Input Texture. Now, it looks like this didn't do anything. It's a little tricky. When I did a fill input texture, it actually filled the first texture, but I wanted it to fill the second texture in there. So back in Canvas, the new layer selected, I just want to tell it that the input texture for this layer is 2. And now it fills the second texture into the new layer. The new texture is completely overriding the old one, but if I select that layer, I can change the blend mode to add. And now the details are being added into the layer below it. Now what's interesting is if you go back to the Nodes tab, you can make any changes you want to this texture. For example, I think those stars will be way too big, so I can go to Basic Nodes, Transform, drag a Move and Repeat node, and hit Insert Below. I can increase those numbers there and put a much finer pattern on the cloth. Now let's render this texture and see what we got. Okay, so I've rendered and exported the texture. Now back in iClone, let's double click there and load in our modified texture. And there it is, and you can see what a huge difference that one simple modification made. If you want to learn more about Genetica, there are more tutorials to be found at this URL.